Water exploded upward in a silver sheet as Akana's body hit the surface of the hotel's rooftop pool, and for one suspended second the entire summer gala went silent. Champagne glasses froze midair. A live jazz band stopped between notes. 200 of Seoul's wealthiest guests turned as one, and there, standing at the edge of the infinity pool in a white silk gown now soaked through with chlorine and humiliation, was a woman named Seo Jaeyeon, her hand still outstretched from the shove, her smile already curling back into place as if nothing at all had happened. "Oops," she said sweetly, loud enough for the cameras. "I guess the waitress isn't used to walking in heels near water." Laughter rippled through the crowd, the kind of laughter that costs nothing and means everything. Akana broke the surface gasping, her uniform clinging to her skin, her carefully pinned hair collapsing down her back in dark ropes. She reached for the pool's edge, and that was when a small voice cut through 200 adults like a blade through silk. A tiny girl no older than 3 broke free of the catering staff's hands and ran, in tiny patent leather shoes straight toward the water, screaming for her mother with a terror that no child should ever have to feel in a room full of powerful, well-dressed strangers. And in that single moment, in front of every camera, every socialite, every reporter hired to cover the Kang Group's engagement gala, the entire trajectory of 3 lives changed forever. Because the little girl didn't just scream for her mother, she turned, pointed a small trembling finger at the tall man standing frozen near the champagne tower, and cried out the one word that would unravel a lie 18 months in the making. "Appa, Appa fell in the water, Daddy. Daddy, Mommy fell in the water. Welcome to Korean Romance Tales, where love, passion, and emotional stories come to life." If this hook already has your heart racing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next will change the way you see every person standing at that pool before the water. Before the silk gown and the shove and the scream that shattered a room full of masks, there was simply a girl named Akana, 24 years old, working double shifts at a small noodle restaurant 3 subway stops from the Han River, where the broth was cheap, and the hours were long and nobody asked questions about the quiet sadness she carried behind her smile. Akana had come to Seoul 4 years earlier from a small coastal town, chasing nothing more dramatic than a decent job and a chance to build something of her own. She was not the kind of woman who dreamed of billionaires. She dreamed of saving enough to open a small restaurant of her own one day, something warm and unpretentious, a place where tired people could eat something that reminded them of home. She had a gentle laugh, calloused hands, and a habit of humming old folk songs while she worked, unaware that a man in an expensive coat sitting alone in the corner booth had been coming back to that same noodle shop for 3 weeks straight, not for the food, but for the sound of her voice. His name was Kang Min-ho, though he never gave it to her at first. He called himself Min-ho, nothing more, and wore clothes plain enough that she never once suspected he was the heir to one of the country's largest conglomerates, a company whose name was stitched into half the skyline she walked beneath every day. He liked that she didn't recognize him. He liked even more that she teased him for overordering and never finishing his food, that she scolded him gently for working too late, that she treated him like a tired man and not like a fortune. "You look like someone who forgets to eat unless a stranger nags you," she told him one rainy night, sliding an extra dumpling onto his plate without being asked. "Eat, you'll feel more like a person." He had laughed, really laughed, not the practiced version he gave at board meetings, and something in his chest had cracked open just slightly, like a window left unlatched in a house that had been sealed shut for years. They were never a grand romance. There were no declarations under cherry blossoms, no rings, no promises whispered in 5-star hotel suites. There was only a handful of quiet months, walks along the river after her shifts ended, a shared umbrella during a sudden downpour, a single aching night neither of them planned, born from grief on his side after his father's stroke and comfort on hers after a lonely birthday spent entirely alone. In the morning, Min-ho was gone before she woke, called back by an emergency board meeting concerning his father's health. And by the time he tried to return to the noodle shop 3 days later, Akana had already vanished, quit without notice, her landlord unable to say where she'd gone. He searched. Quietly, without his family's knowledge, he searched for months. But Seoul is a city of 10 million people, and a waitress without a surname he knew, without a phone number, without even a photograph, was like trying to find a single candle flame in a blackout city. Eventually buried under his father's declining health and the sudden crushing weight of inheriting a company earlier than anyone expected, Min-ho let the search go cold, though he never quite let go of her voice, or the ache of an apology he never got to give. What he did not know, what no one in his family would learn for nearly 2 years, was that Akana had not vanished by choice. She had left because a single home pregnancy test, taken alone in a shared bathroom at 2 a.m., had told her that the night she couldn't stop thinking about had left her with far more than a memory she never once considered telling him. Not because she didn't care, but because she had overheard, weeks earlier and quite by accident, hushed conversation among restaurant regulars about the Kang heir being quietly steered toward a merger marriage with the Seo group's only daughter, a woman named Seo Jae-yeon, elegant, ambitious, and already treated by the tabloids as the inevitable future Mrs. Kang. Akana, 24 and terrified and entirely without power in a world built by people like the Kangs, made the only decision that felt like it protected both her child and the man she still quietly loved. She would raise the baby alone. She would ask for nothing. She named her daughter Hana, meaning the one good thing to come from a night she never regretted, no matter how much it cost her. For nearly 2 years, Akana built a small, careful life around her daughter in a rented one-room apartment in Incheon, working 3 jobs, sewing Hana's clothes by hand when money was tight, never once telling anyone, not her coworkers, not her landlord, not even her own mother back home, who the child's father truly was. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself a name meant nothing if the man attached to it would never be part of their lives. Fate, however, does not care what people tell themselves. If you're already feeling this ache in your chest, imagine what's coming. Comment "I'm still watching" if you want to see how far this story goes, and don't forget, this channel exists for stories exactly like this one. Like, share, subscribe, and stay close, because what happens next will break your heart before it heals it. The Grand Seoram Hotel had always been the crown jewel of the Kang Group's hospitality division, and it was there, 18 months after Hana's birth, that a desperate staffing shortage during a record heatwave led an overworked event agency to send temporary catering staff from 3 different companies to cover the hotel's biggest gala of the year, the public engagement celebration of Kang Min-ho and Seo Jae-yeon. Akana had taken the shift because it paid triple the normal rate and because her regular part-time cleaning job had cut her hours that month. She needed the money for Hana's daycare fees, nothing more. She had no idea, standing in the service elevator in her rented catering blacks, hair pinned tightly back, tray balanced against her hip, that the name on the banner 3 floors up, Kang Min-ho and Seo Jae-yeon, in gold calligraphy against white silk, belonged to the same quiet man who once ate dumplings alone in a noodle shop and asked her more than once what her name meant. She found out the moment she stepped onto the rooftop terrace and saw him. He was older now, sharper in a tailored black suit, his face more tired than she remembered but unmistakably his, standing beside a stunning woman in white whose smile did not reach anywhere near her eyes. Akana froze for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for a passing server to bump her tray, long enough for a single champagne flute to nearly tip, and in that frozen moment across a crowd of 200 people, Min-ho looked up, their eyes met, his whole body went rigid. The champagne glass forgotten in his hand, his lips parting around a name he hadn't said aloud in almost 2 years. Akana! He took 1 step toward her before he caught himself, aware suddenly of his fiancée's hand tightening on his arm, aware of cameras, aware of 200 witnesses to a reaction he could not explain and had no right in that setting to chase. Jae-yeon's eyes followed his gaze and landed on the trembling waitress holding a tray of champagne, and something cold and calculating slid across her expression before the polite mask returned. "Do you know her, darling?" she asked, voice light as spun sugar, though her grip on his arm had turned to iron. "No," Min-ho said too quickly, and hated himself the instant the word left his mouth because Akana's face, for just a flicker, cracked with a hurt so raw it nearly buckled her knees. She turned and walked away as fast as her tray allowed, weaving through the crowd toward the service exit, her heart slamming so hard she thought the guests around her might hear it. She had spent almost 2 years building a wall around that chapter of her life. It had taken him 4 seconds to remind her exactly how thin that wall really was. What Akana did not know, could not have known, was that Jae-yeon had already begun asking questions the moment the gala ended. A woman does not spend 3 years clawing her way into a merger engagement by ignoring the way her fiancé's face falls apart at the sight of a stranger. By the following morning, private investigators hired quietly through the Seo family's security office had a name and address in Incheon, and buried in a hospital record obtained through a bribed clinic administrator a birth certificate: Kang Hana, born 22 months earlier, father, listed as unknown. Jae-yeon stared at the paperwork in her penthouse office for a long time before she allowed herself a slow, thin smile. Unknown, the certificate said. But Jae-yeon had seen Min-ho's face at that gala. She didn't need a DNA test to know the truth in her bones, she needed one for leverage, and she intended to get it quietly on her own timeline in a way that would let her decide exactly how and when the truth would detonate, and who it would destroy. She was not, after all, a woman who liked surprises she hadn't engineered herself. Min-ho could not sleep that night or the night after. He sat in his penthouse office long past midnight, staring at nothing, replaying 4 seconds at a gala over and over until they blurred into 2 years of buried guilt. He had told himself for so long that letting Akana go cold in his search had been an acceptable loss, a private grief he could carry quietly while building the empire his father's failing health had thrust onto his shoulders too early. Seeing her face again, thinner, more tired, dressed in a catering uniform that told him exactly how hard her life must have been, undid every justification he'd built. He hired his own investigator the very next morning, separate from his family's usual channels, and swore the man to absolute discretion. It took 4 days. When the file landed on his desk, Min-ho read the words Kang Hana, born 22 months ago 3 times before the meaning fully landed, and when it did, his hands began to shake so badly he had to set the folder down. A daughter. He had a daughter, and the woman he had never stopped thinking about had raised her alone, in silence, asking nothing of him, while he stood at galas being celebrated for a merger marriage built on spreadsheets and shareholder confidence. He went to Incheon that same night, alone, without his driver, without telling a single member of his staff. He stood outside a modest apartment building for almost 20 minutes before he found the courage to knock, and when the door opened and Akana saw him standing there, no suit, no cameras, no fiancé on his arm, just a man with red-rimmed eyes and 2 years of unspoken apology written across his face, she nearly closed the door on him out of sheer instinct. "Please," he said, voice breaking. I know about Hana, I'm not here to make trouble, he stopped, swallowed hard. "I just needed you to know that I never stopped looking for you. Not until my father got sick and everything fell apart. I should have looked harder, I should have never let you disappear." Akana's eyes filled, but her voice when it came was steady in a way that surprised them both. "I didn't disappear because I stopped caring, Min-ho. I left because I heard you were being pushed into marrying someone else, and I wasn't going to be the woman who ruins that with a baby you never asked for. I didn't want Hana's whole life to start with people calling her a mistake, a scandal, a bargaining chip. I wanted her to just be loved, simply, without any of this." "She is loved," Min-ho said, and for the first time since he'd arrived, his gaze dropped to the small child peeking out from behind Akana's leg, wide dark eyes studying the strange man in the doorway with the open, fearless curiosity only very young children still possess. "She's loved so much it terrifies me that I missed almost 2 years of it." Hana, entirely unbothered by the weight of the adult's conversation, tilted her head and asked with the blunt honesty of a toddler, "Are you Uma's friend?" Min-ho crouched slowly to her eye level, throat tight. "I'd like to be," he said softly, "if that's all right with you." Hana considered this with great seriousness, then held out a small stuffed rabbit missing one ear as if an offering. Min-ho took it as gently as if he'd been handed something made of glass, and in that ordinary tiny gesture, something inside him that had been frozen since the gala finally quietly broke open. He did not ask Akana for anything that night, not forgiveness, not a place in her life, not even a promise. He only asked if he could come back, if he could know his daughter, if he could, slowly and without pressure, try to be present in whatever way she would allow. Akana, exhausted from 2 years of carrying a secret alone, and undone by the sight of him kneeling in front of their daughter with tears in his eyes, said yes before she could talk herself out of it. What neither of them said aloud that night was the far more complicated truth sitting underneath it all. Min-ho was still on paper and in 3 weeks' time engaged to be married to another woman. If your chest is tight right now, take a breath, because this is only the beginning of what Jaeyeon is planning. This is Korean Romance Tales, and if stories like this move you, hit subscribe now so you don't miss a single moment of what's coming. For the next several weeks, Min-ho visited Incheon in secret, arriving late in unmarked cars, leaving before dawn, terrified that any misstep would hand Jaeyeon and her family's lawyers ammunition to use against both Akana and Hana. He told himself it was temporary, that once he found the right moment, the right strategy, he would go to his ailing father, break the engagement cleanly, and give Akana and Hana the life and the name they deserved. He did not yet understand that Jaeyeon was 3 moves ahead of him. Jaeyeon had known about Hana for weeks by the time Min-ho started his secret visits, and she had spent that time not confronting him, but quietly meticulously assembling a case. DNA samples lifted discreetly from a napkin Min-ho had used at a family dinner, cross-referenced against a sample obtained from Hana's daycare through a bribed staff member. Financial records showing the exact dates and amounts of a private allowance Min-ho had begun quietly wiring to an Incheon bank account. And photographs, dozens of them, of his unmarked car parked outside Akana's building at odd hours. She did not intend to use any of it to destroy the engagement. She intended to use it to control it. 3 days before the public engagement gala, Jaeyeon requested a private meeting with Min-ho in his office and laid the folder on his desk without a word. He opened it, and the color drained from his face as he understood, page by page, exactly how much she knew, and exactly how long she had known it without saying anything. "Known," he said hoarsely. "This whole time. Of course I've known," Jaeyeon said, settling into the chair across from his desk with the composure of a woman who had rehearsed this exact conversation in front of a mirror. "I've known since 2 days after that gala where you couldn't take your eyes off a waitress. What I want you to understand, Min-ho, is that none of this changes anything. Our engagement stands. The merger between our family's companies stands. You may keep your little arrangement in Incheon quiet and discreet, and I will look the other way, provided you never embarrass me publicly and never let that child's existence become a headline that damages the Kang name or mine." "She's my daughter," Min-ho said, low and furious. "Not an arrangement, not something to manage." "She's a liability," Jaeyeon corrected, voice still perfectly pleasant. "Born to a woman with no name, no education, no family connections, conceived while you were supposedly grieving your father's illness. I am being remarkably generous by offering to let this remain your quiet, private matter instead of turning it into the scandal it actually is. I suggest you take the offer, Min-ho, and be grateful I'm not the kind of woman who burns things down out of spite. Min-ho stared at her for a long moment, disgust curdling in his stomach not only at what she was proposing but at how calmly, how comfortably she proposed it, as if his daughter were a line item to be quietly written off a balance sheet. I won't hide her, he said finally. Not anymore. Something flickered behind Jae-yoon's eyes, not hurt, but calculation recalibrating in real time. Then you'll destroy your father's company right when he needs the merger most, she said softly, standing and smoothing her skirt. Think carefully, Min-ho, I'm offering you the easy path. You won't like what happens if you force me onto the hard one. She left without waiting for his answer, and Min-ho sat alone in his office long into the night, torn between the two people he had sworn in very different ways to protect: a dying father whose company's future depended on a merger, and a daughter whose existence he refused to keep treating as a secret. He did not yet know that Jae-yoon had already decided, quietly and privately, that if she could not control the situation through threats, she would control it through humiliation, and that the upcoming engagement gala, meant to be the public celebration of her victory, would become instead the stage for exactly that. This is the part where the story shifts, and if you feel that shift in your own chest right now, that's exactly the reaction we love hearing about. Comment below and tell us who you think is really in the wrong here. And remember, this is Korean romance tales. Like, share, and subscribe so this story reaches someone else who needs to feel it too. Which brings the story back to the rooftop, back to the silver sheet of water and the frozen champagne glasses, back to a small girl in patent leather shoes screaming for her mother across a crowd of 200 people who had gathered to celebrate a lie. Jae-yoon had not planned the shove as an act of impulsive jealousy. She had spent an entire week ensuring Akana's catering agency would be one of the 3 called in for the gala, quietly bribing an events coordinator to guarantee Akana's specific team was assigned to the rooftop terrace station, close enough to the pool, close enough to Min-ho, close enough for exactly the confrontation she intended to orchestrate on her own terms, in front of exactly the audience she wanted watching. What Jae-yoon had not accounted for was Hana. Akana had made the difficult decision that week to bring Hana along rather than pay for last-minute daycare, planning to leave her safely with a trusted coworker in the hotel's staff break room for the few hours of the event. But hotel security, overwhelmed by the size of the gala, had been lax that evening, and a curious, energetic 2-year-old does not stay contained in a break room for long. Hana had wandered, undetected, all the way up to the rooftop terrace just in time to see her mother's tray tip, just in time to see the woman in white push her mother toward the water's edge with a shove disguised to every camera and every guest as an accident. The moment Akana surfaced, gasping, humiliated, soaked to the bone in front of 200 strangers laughing at her expense, Hana's small world narrowed to a single, overwhelming terror. Her mother was in danger, and the only adult on that rooftop she recognized as safe enough to run to, the only one whose face she trusted, was the man who had been quietly visiting them for weeks, kneeling at her level, calling her by name, letting her braid his hair with plastic hair clips while her mother made dinner. Appa, Uma fell in the water. The word detonated across the rooftop like a flare fired into the dark. Guests who had been laughing seconds earlier fell into stunned, murmuring silence. Cameras that had been discreetly filming the engagement gala for society pages and gossip blogs swiveled instantly toward the small girl, toward Min-ho's frozen, ashen face, toward Jae-yoon's smile collapsing in real time into something far uglier. Min-ho did not hesitate. He crossed the terrace in seconds, shrugging off his suit jacket, and dove straight into the pool fully dressed to reach Akana, pulling her against him and swimming her to the shallow end while Hana sobbed at the poolside, reaching for both of them with small, desperate hands. He lifted his daughter into one arm and his soaked, shaking former love into the other, and turned dripping, furious, utterly beyond caring what the assembled crowd or cameras thought, to face his fiancée. You pushed her, he said, voice shaking with a rage 200 guests had never once seen from the composed, carefully controlled Kang air. In front of my daughter, you pushed her mother into the pool in front of my daughter. Jae-yoon's composure, for the first time in years, entirely deserted her. You're your daughter, she repeated, loud enough that the murmuring crowd surged into open, audible gasps, phones rising instantly to capture every second. Min-ho, careful what you say in front of all these. I don't care anymore, Min-ho cut her off, and something in the set of his jaw told everyone present he meant it absolutely. I don't care who's filming, I don't care what this does to the merger. This is my daughter Kang Hana. This is Akana, her mother, the woman I have loved since before I ever met you, and the woman you just humiliated in front of 200 people because you found out I never stopped loving her. A ripple of scandal-hungry whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire through dry grass, phones capturing every word, every soaked, furious second of it, and by the time Min-ho carried both Akana and Hana off that rooftop terrace, the videos were already spreading across every social platform in the country, the headline writing itself before a single journalist even had to try. Kang Group heir publicly renounces fiancé after alleged assault on secret daughter's mother. Jae-yeon stood alone at the edge of the pool, dress dripping where she'd stumbled forward trying to grab Min-ho's arm, her carefully built image dissolving in real time in front of the exact cameras she had hired to immortalize her triumph. If you thought that was the climax, stay with us, because this is where things get even more intense, and this next part is exactly why this channel exists. This is Korean Romance Tales, and if your heart is pounding right now, smash that like button and subscribe because Jae-yeon is not the kind of woman who goes down without a fight. The fallout was immediate and merciless. Within 12 hours, the video of Jae-yeon shoving a waitress into a pool, followed by a soaked Kang Min-ho publicly declaring his daughter and former love in front of 200 witnesses, had over 8 million views. News outlets that had spent years fawning over Jae-yeon's storybook engagement pivoted overnight into breathless coverage of scandal, betrayal, and a hidden child. The Seo family's stock dipped nearly 4% by the following morning's opening bell, panicked board members demanding an emergency call, while the Kang Group's own investors flooded the chairman's office with calls of a very different kind, some outraged, some, surprisingly, sympathetic to the story of a man who had chosen his daughter over a loveless merger in front of the entire country. Jae-yeon's father, Chairman Seo, arrived at the Kang Group headquarters within hours, incandescent with fury, prepared to threaten lawsuits, prepared to demand the merger proceed regardless of what the public thought, prepared to remind everyone in the room exactly how much money and power his family controlled. He was met in that boardroom not by Min-ho, but by Min-ho's father Chairman Kang, frail from his illness but sharp-eyed as ever, sitting at the head of the table with a folder of his own already prepared. "Before you say another word," the elder Kang said calmly, sliding the folder across the table, "you should know that my son came to me 3 days ago and told me everything. About the child, about your daughter's threats, about the private investigator reports she used to blackmail him into silence. I have copies of the recorded conversation from his office, Chairman Seo. Your daughter threatened to weaponize an innocent child's existence to control my son's marriage. I suggest, for both our company's sakes, that you consider very carefully what you say next." Chairman Seo's face went through several colors before settling on something ashen and defeated. He had built his family's reputation on precision and control. He had not built it to survive a daughter's cruelty being broadcast to the entire nation in 8 million view increments. "Merger," he began weakly. "Proceed on entirely different terms between our companies without requiring our children's marriage," Chairman Kang said, not unkindly. "I have no interest in destroying your family's business, Chairman Seo. I have every interest in protecting mine and my granddaughter." The word granddaughter landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Chairman Seo, for all his fury, had no answer for it. Within a week, the engagement was formally and publicly dissolved, framed by careful PR teams on both sides as a mutual decision reflecting irreconcilable circumstances. Though every person in the country who had watched that pool footage knew precisely what had actually happened, Jae-yeon did not go quietly. Stripped of her engagement, and increasingly isolated as her own father's patience wore thin under public pressure, she made one final desperate attempt to salvage what she could, arriving unannounced at the modest Incheon apartment where Akana and Hana now lived under quiet round-the-clock security arranged by Min-ho. "You think this makes you happy?" Jae-yeon demanded when Akana opened the door, her voice raw in a way it had never been in public, stripped now of every polished, practiced edge. "You think being some rich man's secret is a victory? I offered you the easy path, quiet money, a comfortable life, no scandal attached to your daughter's name, and instead you let this become a circus. Do you have any idea what you've cost my family?" Akana, exhausted, still healing from the humiliation of the pool, from weeks of secrecy, from years of carrying a truth alone, found something inside her steadier than she expected. "I never asked for any of this," she said quietly. "I didn't want scandal. I didn't want cameras. I wanted my daughter to grow up loved and safe and never once made to feel like a mistake, which is exactly what you tried to make her feel in front of 200 strangers, because you couldn't stand that Min-ho never stopped loving someone else. You didn't lose your engagement because of me, Jae-yeon. You lost it the moment you decided a 2-year-old girl was a problem to be managed instead of a child to be protected." Jae-yeon opened her mouth to respond, fury and grief tangled together behind her eyes, but no words came. For the first time in the entire story, she had nothing left to threaten, nothing left to leverage, no folder of secrets that could restore what her own choices had cost her. She turned and left without another word, and the following month, in a quiet move barely covered by the press she'd once courted so carefully, she relocated to her family's overseas branch office in Singapore, a graceful face-saving exile that everyone involved understood for exactly what it was. We know some of you are hopping she gets what's coming to her even harder than this. Let us know in the comments what you think justice should look like here. And if this story has you completely invested, make sure you're subscribed to Korean Romance Tailies because the ending is coming, and it's the part you've been waiting for. It took nearly 4 months after that night at the pool for Min-ho and Akana to find their footing, not as a fairy tale rushing toward a wedding, but as two people rebuilding trust brick by careful brick, for their own sake as much as for Hana's. Min-ho visited Incheon every single day without fail, no longer hiding, no longer arriving in unmarked cars under cover of darkness. He learned Hana's daycare pickup schedule by heart, learned which stuffed animal she refused to sleep without, learned that Akana still hummed the same old folk songs while she cooked, the same ones that had first made him fall in love with her voice in a noodle shop 3 years earlier. He offered more than once to move them into one of the Kang family properties, a larger apartment, better security and easier life. Akana refused every time gently but firmly. "I don't want Hana growing up thinking love means being given things," she told him one evening sitting on the small balcony of her apartment while Hana slept inside. "I want her growing up knowing love means someone shows up, every day, even when it's hard. Even when there's no gala, no cameras, nothing to prove. Then I'll keep showing up," Min-ho said simply. "For as long as you'll let me." He proposed to her 7 months later, not at a 5-star hotel, not in front of any cameras or society pages, but at the same small noodle shop where they'd first met, now under new ownership but still serving the same broth at the exact corner booth where he used to sit alone. He didn't have a photographer. He didn't have a ring the size of a small planet. He had a small, simple band, and Hana beside him holding a slightly crumpled bouquet of wildflowers she'd insisted on picking herself, and a single question asked so quietly that Akana had to lean in to hear it over the sound of the kitchen. "Let you go once because I didn't fight hard enough to find you," he said. "I'm not making that mistake again. Marry me not because of Hana, not because it would look good, but because I have loved you since before I knew your last name, and I intend to keep loving you long after everyone's forgotten this ever made headlines." Akana, tears streaming freely down her face in the middle of a crowded noodle shop, said yes before he even finished lowering himself to one knee. And Hana, delighted by the commotion, threw her entire bouquet of wildflowers directly into the air with a triumphant shout of "Uma said yes." Uma said yes, that made the entire restaurant burst into applause. They married the following spring, in a small ceremony attended by people who actually mattered to them rather than people who mattered to a merger. Min-ho's father, frail but glowing with quiet pride, walking with a cane down a garden aisle to give an unofficial blessing. Akana's mother, flown in from the coastal town Akana had left 4 years earlier, weeping through the entire ceremony. And Hana, now 3.5, serving as the world's most enthusiastic flower girl, scattering petals with the same reckless joy she'd once scattered wildflowers across a noodle shop floor. Somewhere far away, in an office overlooking Singapore's glittering skyline, Jae-yeon saw the wedding photos circulate quietly online, not with the vicious fanfare of scandal this time, but with the gentle, warm virality of a story people simply love to see end well. She closed the article without comment, and if there was a flicker of old bitterness in her chest, she did not let herself linger on it. Some people learn their lessons through quiet reflection. Jae-yeon's lesson had simply cost her everything she'd once thought mattered most, learned in the harshest, most public way possible, and that, in its own way, was its own kind of ending. And that's when Akana understood, standing in a small garden years after a night that began with silence and a pregnancy test taken alone at 2 a.m., that not every loss is the end. Some are simply the beginning of something far greater, a family built not on merger contracts or carefully staged galas, but on a man who chose to show up, a daughter who screamed the truth into a crowd of strangers, and a love that had survived against every calculated obstacle placed in its path, exactly because it had never once been about the cameras at all. If this story moved you the way we hope it did, you already know what to do. This is Korean Romance Tailies, where love, passion, and emotional stories come to life. And if you enjoy stories exactly like this one, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because there is always another story waiting just around the corner, and we would love nothing more than to have you here for it.